Welcome. We're glad you're joining us tonight. This is not your ordinary church, and this is our Tuesday night podcast. My name is Jordan. I will be your host tonight, asking the questions. This is Pastor Ford,
Hello.
and no
You don't
switch.
get to see me though.
Move like Mike a little closer, maybe.
It's a half a second.
Anyway, yeah. So we'll be talking tonight about faithfulness. Why be faithful to anything? And we actually were just talking about this a little bit before. And I think this will be really good for people to kind of separate in their minds the idea of faithfulness being a religious doctrine and how it is a principle that God has set in place. And what does that even mean? And so, as always, ask questions. We're here to help. And so if you have questions about the topic, off the topic, throw them in there. We'll probably keep the off-topic questions for towards the end. But if they're as they come in, if we think they're something we should talk about right now, we'll do that. And otherwise, we'll have a good time tonight. So file those in the chat box or in the comment section, and we're going to have a good time tonight. All right. So when we're talking about the issue of faithfulness, what is faithfulness? What's the definition of faithfulness?
Okay, so
So that way we know what we're talking about the whole time.
I mean, there's no mystery definition to it in terms of that there's some sort of Christian version of faithfulness and some other version of faithfulness. Is that faithfulness really, when it comes right down to it, is it's the ability to be reliable. That there's a consistency, there's a reliableness. You can be trusted. That it's all those kinds of factors.
It's like a loyalty, basically.
Well, yeah.
So
a loyalty, a trustworthiness.
Yeah. Okay. And so, where does man's idea of faithfulness come from?
I don't know if I can answer where man's idea of faithfulness comes from, other than the fact that faithfulness in general has to obviously begin with somebody who's already faithful. So it comes from God.
Okay.
God's the only one who can actually establish faithfulness. We can't define, something beyond what we're capable of doing. We can't, this is what faithfulness is, faithfulness. And we would come up with this utopian idea of faithfulness because we couldn't possibly actually be the example of the word. We can exemplify faithfulness, but a human will never be the definition of faithfulness.
Well, what about man's requirement for faithfulness? Like there's the obvious, what about creating an idea or definition of faithfulness based on what you expect other people to be towards you? So we're talking about the issue of trustworthiness and stuff like that. Yeah. Obviously, it's an offense to you if somebody screws you over and messes up. If you're married, or that's a very good example of it is marriage. When somebody cheats on you, obviously you expect a commitment there.
Yeah.
But where does that come from? Is that?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to be careful when you start talking about faithfulness in relationship to individual expectations of what faithfulness is and what faithfulness means. Because if I'm part of the criminal underground and I've just murdered somebody and you watch me murder them, my idea of faithfulness is that you're not going to go to the cops and turn me in. But is that really faithfulness?
But that's
when it comes right down to it. But that's my point is that you can't go there. You can't go to a place of having some kind of an idea of faithfulness in terms of human expectation.
Right.
You have to have a definition outside of that.
But don't you think it's fair to say that that's where a lot of people's idea of faithfulness is defined?
Is what?
Is these expectations, stuff like that. The issue of loyalty and stuff like that too. Like, we're using the criminal world, the family, you know what I mean? Like your faithfulness is defined by what other people have expected of you.
Yeah. Well, but I think that's irrelevant though. In terms of the idea of what is faithfulness, because the police would not consider a person being faithful who allows another person to kill somebody else and doesn't say anything.
Right.
So that can't be the definition of faithfulness, because you can't have this group of people says this is what faithfulness is, and this other group says this is what faithfulness is. You can't have that kind of definition. So when we're talking about the issue of faithfulness, there has to be some more general definition, which is, like I said, about the idea of being trustworthy, and reliable and those kinds of things. But I think really, I don't know how profitable this kind of thinking about it is, other than just simply the idea is why, which is the title of, why be faithful? Why be faithful? I think is really probably a more important question, rather than what is faithfulness and what does that look like to different people? Why be faithful at all? And that I think is important.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm kind of leading there, but my point is to try and figure out. I mean, you said it, but I'm looking for a little bit more. I mean, you could expound a little bit on what you mean by it comes from God. So the definition of it. So basically, what you're saying is that God's the one that decides what faithfulness is.
Well, God is the definition of faithful.
Okay.
How? All of it, because he exemplifies faithfulness. So like, the Bible says, be ye holy as I am holy, and so, all the attributes that are what we consider to be important societally, they come from God. We didn't make these up, and which is this is the irony of evolution and evolutionary thinking, because these attributes that we abide by in the world, that we abide by in terms of personal relationships with people, they didn't come from us. They came from God. They have to have come from God, because we wouldn't have come up with them on our own. Who would care? Why is faith, like the title, why be faithful at all, if there is no God? Why should I, what's the benefit? What's the evolutionary expedient for being faithful? Because if I'm devious, I'm going to be more survival of the fittest, because you're going to trust me and I'm going to burn you, and I'm going to take your place.
Yeah.
So it's not, that's why it has to come from God. There has to be some sort of higher source when you're talking about issues of moral value.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me dig at that a little bit, because just thinking about the scenario you're giving, if we don't believe in God, or if, that's, the evolutionist idea, but if I am faithful, in a sense, it can be self-serving as well. So I know that if I'm a faithful or trustworthy guy, I will get more favors in life. So technically, if I just want to be a selfish pig, I can still live that way, and it would profit me in the long run.
Well, that's the interesting thing about these kinds of attributes, is that they're self-correcting, because you cannot be selfish and be faithful. One has to give, because there's going to come that it benefits you personally, but it won't benefit you
Give me
in
an
the long
example
run.
of that. I mean, so that's a very practical.
I
example.
work for you. You handle a lot of cash. I don't know, some kind of a business where you're handling a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been, I'm making $30,000, $50,000 a year working, and you trust me, you give me the keys to the building, and I come in, maybe I'm a janitor, or something like that. And we've been friends for years, and I know that you put, $1 million into the safe, and it's all unmarked bills, and, they're all small 20s and 50s and things like that. And the day comes where you put a lot of money in there. I know it's in there, and this is my moment. So I go in there, I open that safe, I take out all the money, and I go on the run.
Mm-hmm.
I win. And I'm not faithful.
Right. Okay.
But I win.
But using your example, technically you've just, in a sense, shortened the life you're living, and you're now you're living on the run. So you're going to be living hiding all the time. It's not exactly self-serving to do that.
What do you mean?
I mean, you'll have the money, but
yeah, I'm not going
once you run out, that's
I'm not
it.
going to just go back to my house. I'm going to leave the country.
No,
I got millions of dollars now, untraceable.
I get it.
In cash.
That makes logical sense. But once you've spent that, then what?
But if I have millions of dollars, it's probably going to last me the rest of my life.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm not going to spend it and then what?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. I'm good. I'm good. I go buy a yacht. I go do whatever I want to do. I mean, I've got millions of dollars now that I've taken from you. And you can say, well, yeah, but the law is going to catch up with you and stuff like that. Maybe not.
Yeah.
It really is a golden opportunity. more than likely somebody who's in that kind of an environment, probably would be too stupid and get caught. But ultimately, but if you really work this out in terms of the issue of faithfulness alone, there would become a point where it would be advantageous to me, because if I'm faithful to you at my $50,000 job, a year job, I'm not going to all of a sudden wake up one day and have $1 million
Yeah.
because I'm a good boy.
Yeah.
And I have $1 million to do what I want with. I may never see $1 million. That may be my only chance of getting $1 million,
Right.
is to burn you and take all the money and run. And so my point being isn't whether that's smart or not.
Yeah.
The issue is that that's an opportunity where unfaithfulness would be to my advantage.
Mm.
So, on the surface, it looks like that.
So what you're saying basically is that faithfulness is more than just what people can see you doing. Something.
What
is
yeah.
faithfulness in that
Well,
realm? What would
I
be
think I think my point more than anything else is that faithfulness is more than just simply, the idea of being trustworthy, in and of itself. There's a moral component to this of who you are as a person. Because the truth of the matter is if I have stolen millions of dollars from somebody and gone somewhere else, I'm not going to be trustworthy. I'm just not going to be trustworthy. And so that's going to play out in life. I may not get caught for that. And this is my point, is that I'm talking about, if you just talk about it from the standpoint of survival of the fittest, and this is the kind of person I become, it's going to benefit me. It's going to benefit me, but it's going to cost me also. It's going to cost me something very, very valuable as a person. Because of the kind of person I'm going to become. So that's a moral issue. That's separate from the actual, just the practical elements of it, just the trust. Being trustworthy is more than whether or not somebody can give you keys and you're not going to steal their money. It's deeper than that. And so because I thought about this, and I thought about some of the sayings that we have, like if you watch the pennies, then the pounds will take care of themselves, or the dollars will take care of themselves. Jesus saying he was faithful in that which is least is faithful over much. And, there's the Benjamin Franklin, a penny saved is a penny earned. This kind of thinking about faithfulness is super, super practical. It has a super practical element to it that has long-term benefits. But you have to decide what's important. And this is why, so to answer the question, why be faithful to anything? The answer is, it depends on what your goal is in life. If your goal in life is to just have a lot of money, and be able to do whatever you want to do, then faithfulness isn't going to help you. It's not going to make any difference. But if you want to be a person, if you want to be a person, then faithfulness is everything, because of some of the things that I just mentioned. Is the idea is when you're faithful in something, it has long-term benefits that are not just measured in dollars and cents. They're measured in other things.
What? How? I mean, because you're talking about, again, going back to your janitor. You're never going to wake up and have that kind of money randomly.
But if I'm faithful, I'm probably not going to just be a janitor the rest of my life.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying is if you're a faithful person, then you're probably not going to just be a janitor. You're going to have opportunities for promotion. You're going to have opportunities for advancement in life, because faithfulness is it's being faithful in the small things that open the door to bigger things. And so the opportunity for bigger things will open to the faithful person where they won't open to the unfaithful person. But that, like I said, the faithful person. But you think of that scenario. I mean, what's the chances of falling into that scenario?
Right.
You just happen to be a devious person, and you just happen to get an opportunity working for a guy who just happens to have millions of dollars that he just happens to be putting into a safe. I mean, when you start
somehow you have the code to, or that he leaves on.
Yeah, that because he trusts you.
Yeah.
A lot. There's a lot of things that probably make that scenario not realistic.
Right.
But my point being is that there's always an opportunity to sell out. There's always an opportunity to stop being faithful. But continued faithfulness it has a benefit.
Right.
There's a payoff, but the payoff is over the long term. Like I said, I mean, that's one of the things that I see when people, you know, especially when you talk about believers, when they cut corners on the idea of being faithful, being trustworthy, being reliable, being responsible, it costs them in the long run. It costs them. They never outrun the reaping of bad fruit in their lives when they try to cut those kinds
Is
of
that
corners.
unique to believers?
No, it's not. It's everybody. It's everybody. It's the issue of a faithful person. I'm just, as a pastor of just watching people over the years and seeing people who are they're I don't know. There's probably a better way of describing, but they're corner cutters. They cut the corner. They don't mind little moments of unfaithfulness. They always pay for it. They always pay for it in missed opportunities. And so it works out that way. Marriage, family, all those kinds of things. When you're the kind of person, so this is the thing, like with fornication, because fornication obviously there's no faithfulness in fornication whatsoever. And so some people, they'll be in the church and they're in the church and things aren't going their way. They want to get married. They want to have a family or something like that. And things aren't happening as quick as they want to. So what are they going to do? They're going to cut corners. They're going to find themselves a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and not somebody who's necessarily Christian. They'll lower the standards so they can have what they're after. And it may not be somebody that they're ready to marry, but hey, let's give it a shot, at a relationship. And then they end up sleeping together, and maybe hanging out, their boyfriend and girlfriend, and they're doing all these kinds of things. It almost always, almost inevitably, either they break up or they inevitably there's a breakup. Okay, at some point, there's always a breakup. It's never, yep, we fornicated and we did all these kinds of things, and now here we are, 70 years later, still married and still in love. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't happen. It usually works out that there's a separation, whether they get married and get divorced, or whether they never get married and break up. And sometimes there's kids involved, and the thing gets messy and ugly. But when you choose to not be faithful, it always works out in those kinds of consequences. It never works out as if you just cut corners. But my intent is to be faithful. I really do want to get married. I really do want to have a family. I do really want God's best for my life. It never works out like that. That never ever happens. There's not, in 28 years of pastoring, 38 years of salvation, there's never been one time that I've ever seen that.
So we've established that Christians, or we should say
well,
believers,
faithfulness in general.
Yeah. So my question then is we know what drives a Christian or a believer to be faithful.
No, I'm talking about just in general.
Right.
That could be, it doesn't have to be a Christian. It could be a non-Christian. The same rules apply.
Right. But what would make somebody that isn't a believer want to be faithful?
Well, but that's my point, is because, an unbeliever doesn't understand the importance of faithfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Because faithfulness is a Christian attribute. It's a God attribute.
Mm-hmm.
And so, not that people don't know the meaning of the word. They just don't know what it means to actually live it.
So are you saying that people that aren't Christians aren't faithful?
No.
Ever?
They have their own definition of faithful.
That's kind of a bold statement.
Well, but they have their own definition of faithful. That's the thing, is I'm faithful. I only have one girlfriend that I sleep with. But I'm faithful to her. I don't sleep with any other girls.
Right.
Yeah, but you didn't marry her. Well, who says you have to get married? Marriage is just a piece of paper. Well, yeah, see, this is the thing, is that faithful is devotion. Devotion is marriage, because marriage is a contract that says I am going to be faithful to you and you alone. Mm-hmm. Anything that you do before then, test driving a car, you can still walk away and say, I'm not interested in the car. Mm-hmm. It's when you pay for the car and you get the title. It's your car, and that's all. And now we're done. And it's the same thing with marriage. You say, oh, well, we're not married. Marriage is just a piece of paper. Yeah, so is a title. Title of a car is just a piece of paper as well. But it makes a big difference when you get pulled over by the cops.
Yeah.
If you don't have the title, but you claim it's your car, doesn't matter. Not your car unless you have the title. And if you don't have, I was going to buy it. No, it's considered theft if you've taken that car and it's been turned in, even if you were going to buy it.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. And the same thing's true when it comes to a relationship. If you really are faithful to somebody, then you're going to marry them. You're not going to sleep with them before you marry them. You're going to honor them.
Mhm.
And so that's faithfulness. But
Well,
again,
people
these are
out,
concepts that are only valued in Christian community because non-Christians don't understand. They just don't, and that's why I say they can't be faithful because they don't
Well,
they
maybe
don't.
better to say believers because obviously, non-Christians do believe in marriage and faithfulness and stuff like that as well, don't they?
Well, what I'm saying in general is no. I mean, no. Christianity, marriage is a Christian thing. That's a Christian idea. It's not a non-Christian idea. I know that Hindus get married, but Christianity was where marriage was
Prove
introduced.
that. What do you mean?
Where it was introduced?
Yeah, prove. Why are you saying?
Prove it.
Yeah, I can't.
In the beginning, God created what? Adam and Eve
Mm.
and their husband and wife. So unless you can prove to me that there was another couple before Adam and Eve that got married, it started with God. It started with the God of Christianity, Christ, Jesus himself.
So, is the only value in faithfulness in believing in God?
No, it's not. You're missing the point of you can't even define faithfulness unless you have a reference point, which has to be God. And it has to be the God who created marriage, who's the God who is the God that is faithful. All these things all work together. They're concepts that all work together.
So, what kind of faithfulness does God require of man? Or what kind of faithfulness are we talking about here? Like, is it faithfulness in all things? Is it faithfulness to certain things? Or like, how does that work?
Well, there's no such thing as faithfulness in some things. That's because faithfulness is an attribute of who you are.
Mhm.
It's
But okay, well, let me ask the question differently. Like, if you're not a Christian, are you required to be faithful to your wife?
no.
Okay. But when you are a Christian, that's an established.
That
Like,
you're required to be
required,
faithful
yeah,
to your wife when you're a Christian?
Yeah.
If you're going to remain one, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, but I'm not.
Are there areas where that's not applicable? I mean, we're talking about, Christianity sort of, but like, for instance, church attendance. Is that like, can you just, throw out your own
Can you be
idea
faithful
of
and
that?
not?
Like,
not
does God
yeah.
require you to be faithful to?
Well, like I said, can I mean, it's you think about this. Can you be faithful without being faithful?
Mhm.
That's a self-answering question.
Yeah.
That's a rhetorical question because obviously you can't be faithful.
Right. But
without
okay, so
being
before you
faithful.
get married, you
Uh,
have the option of who to marry,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, when let's just say somebody, who doesn't believe in God, makes a decision or has an epiphany or a revelation of who God, I believe in God. They make this transition in their minds of going from a non-believer to a believer. How does the idea of faithfulness, begin to play out in their lives? Is
Uh,
it something that God comes down and tells them, you need to be faithful to this church, you need to be reading this Bible, you need to be reading or living this type of lifestyle now? Like, how does that work?
yeah. Well, let's say. Okay, so here's the
Yeah,
problem.
but Brittany actually
Yeah.
asks the question
Yeah.
exactly.
Is
how
it
I'm trying to
possible to be faithful in one
Yes.
area and not in
Yeah.
another?
I'll get to your question in a sec, Carissa. You said it a second ago. You just didn't expound on it.
Well, the problem with that question is you're limiting faithfulness to a subject.
Yes.
And so that's like, okay, so let me ask this, ask it this way. Okay, if I spend $50 frivolously on junk that I don't need, but yet when I get my paycheck, I put, $100 out of my paycheck into the bank. Am I financially responsible?
I think it depends on how much money you have in the bank.
No, it doesn't depend on how much money I have in the bank. It depends on where you're going to draw the line on being responsible.
Right.
If you are the definition of financially responsible, then no, because you're spending money frivolously.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter how much you're putting in the bank, you're still a waster,
I see what you're saying. Okay.
you know.
So,
But if I'm putting this money in the bank, then I am being responsible to save, but I'm being irresponsible by spending money frivolously. And so the question you're asking, though, is, am I a financially responsible person? The answer is no. Just because I do something responsible doesn't mean I'm responsible. And just because I do something faithful doesn't mean that I'm faithful. It just means that I did something faithfully.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean I'm faithful.
right.
So when the Bible says something like, he who is faithful in that which is least will be faithful over much. If I am only faithful in that which is least sometimes, then I'm not faithful in that which is least.
Mhm. So what about, so you're using the example of one subject, finances, right? So you're doing something in
No,
finance.
I'm talking
doing
about the issue
something
of
else in finance.
responsibility.
Right. Yeah, no, I know, but you're using one subject. So maybe the question, and this is more what I was asking, is different subjects under the same kind of umbrella. So we're talking about Christianity again,
Yeah.
faithfulness to
Yeah.
God, but not faithfulness to the church.
Well, but see, that's what I'm saying is that there's no such thing.
Okay.
Yeah. You can't be faithful to God and not be faithful to church. And that's my point, because you're talking about a character. Are you faithful? Because being faithful to God means that you are a faithful person.
Mm.
Not because there's no way to be faithful to God, in certain areas. You're either faithful to God or you're not faithful to God. You can't be faithful to God in finances, but not be faithful to God in some other area. You're not faithful to God.
Mhm.
You may be faithful to God in finances, and that may make you feel good, but you're not a faithful person.
Right.
Because you can't. So the idea of, so the answer to the question, is it possible to be faithful in one area and not in another? The answer is yes. But if the question is, does that make me faithful? The answer is no, I'm not faithful.
Mhm.
Because if I'm faithful, then I'm going to be faithful in all areas, not just one or two or the majority. I'm going to be a faithful person. I'm going to be faithful, period. Trustworthy, reliable, whatever that is, in everything.
Mhm. So that would explain why people who aren't believers but follow God's principles of faithfulness have success in whatever they are being faithful in. Example, marriage, job, etc.
Yeah. So you have non-believers who they wait till they're married, and they get married before they sleep together, and there's a very good possibility that their marriage is going to be successful. As opposed to those that don't. This is why you have, one of the statistics that gets thrown out all the time about marriage is that 50% of all marriages end in divorce. Well, 70% of all people that shack up end up in separation. So which is better?
Yeah.
You want a 70% chance that you're going to separate from the person that you're with because marriage is just a piece of paper,
Yeah.
or 50% with somebody who you're married to. And the truth of the matter is that statistic of 50% of people ending up in divorce, a lot of those people had sex before they got married.
Mhm.
And so if you were to subdivide that out to people who didn't have sex before they got married, and then they got married, and they've been faithful in that marriage to each other, the statistics are going to go. They're going to be much more favorable to them staying married versus getting divorced.
Is that kind of why the first commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and we have to be faithful in everything because we love God first, and that makes me faithful.
Well, when I think about my own personal salvation, um, the when I got so getting saved, I think this is the interesting thing, the difference between being religious and getting saved. When I got saved, because I didn't have a religious background, when I got saved, I had a revelation, a very full revelation of who God was, who I am, and who I should be, and what God expected of me. So all of those things were there. I didn't have to read the Bible to learn that smoking pot was wrong, or that drinking or partying or having sex outside of marriage. I didn't have to read the Bible, discover those things, and find that those things were wrong. I didn't have to read somewhere in the Bible about swearing was wrong. I didn't need to know any of those things. They were all in me. They were deposited in me on the day of my salvation. I knew what right and wrong was. And that's it. And the question of faithfulness was just simply, am I going to do this? Am I going to comply with this new level or this new standard of right and wrong? And so loving God didn't happen until after I made that decision, to the decision that I'm going to be faithful. God has revealed to me how my life is in sin. And am I going to repent? Am I going to turn from these things? God made it very, very clear the entirety of my life. I didn't have to go through, like I said, reading the Bible and stuff like that. I knew, the Bible says that God writes his word on the tables of our heart. I knew what needed to change. I knew what needed to go away. I knew what needed to happen. And the question was, am I going to comply with this? Am I going to allow this process to happen in my life? So to try to talk about it from the standpoint of a scripture, and the idea that there's some sort of order of loving God. It's when God reveals himself to you, it's a complete package. It's not, and that's why I say it's the difference between salvation and religion, because in religion, you're trying to find out what's the most important thing. You say, okay, well, in religion, what is the most important thing? And so you go to the commandments, like what Jesus did with this lawyer when he tells him, it's his, he tells him, what do you think? Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. You notice that Jesus, when he communicates back to him, is he says, yeah, if you do these things, you'll live. And so it's an understanding that there's a completeness in just those two scriptures: love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and not love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then after you do that, you need to learn how to love your neighbor as yourself. No, you just comply with these two things and you'll live. And so that's the difference. You can't give it a hierarchy. That you do this and then you do this and then you do this and then you do this. Faithfulness is a decision. You just decide, I'm going to be faithful.
Right.
So,
okay, we're gonna give you a T-ball question here, possibly a loaded question. This is I'm reading. Are you being faithful to your marriage by ignoring your unbelieving spouse and always showing faithfulness to church? Is there a balance to this?
well, I like the honesty of it being a loaded question, because one of the because the question itself is too narrowly framed of a scenario. Because there is an answer, but the answer is not helpful to anything, because you're talking about you're talking about a scenario that you should never be in anyway. I mean, you just shouldn't be in this scenario. You shouldn't be in a scenario where your relationship with your spouse is separate from your involvement in church, because both of those are encompassed under your relationship with God. And so
wait. So you're saying your faithfulness to your marriage actually is connected to your faithfulness to God?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And see the interconnecting of these things. And so if you are only faithful to church and you ignore your spouse, then you're religious. It's because it's not honoring God. It's not honoring God. It's honoring a religion, because it's only about church attendance.
Ah, yeah. Okay.
And so you're just attending church faithfully, quote unquote, but you're not being faithful to God because you're not honoring your spouse, and so that's where the snag comes in, is when you put your spouse, even an unbelieving spouse, on one path, and you put being involved in church on another path. You're talking about religion, because those two things should be intertwined with each other. They both should be important, and so the issue of
why should both be important?
Because they both have to do with faithfulness. And so that's why they have to be important.
Right.
Is that it's an issue of faithfulness. You can't. In my own life, when I first became a Christian, my mom, especially my mom, would always want to get together on Sundays, and I would tell her, no, that's when I go to church. I said, let's get together on Saturday. So we got together on Saturday because I could see her on Saturday. So am I being uncaring about my mom because I make a priority out of going to church on Sunday? No, because I made it a priority to see her on Saturday when I have time. Because it's not a church day.
Yeah.
And that works. I mean, there's 7 days in the week.
Yeah, this is let me just interject this follow up to the question, because you're kind of talking about you're going down this path. So if your spouse does not like you constantly in church activities, then you should obey that.
See, this is what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
exactly.
If you did that, would you be faithful to God? That's the question that has to be answered. Would you still be faithful to God? Would God look at you and say, "Yep, that's faithfulness"?
Mm.
See, that's a question that has to be answered. And the truth is obviously that's not the case.
Mm.
That's not the case, because you're not talking about an issue of being faithful to your spouse by having to yield to your spouse's demands.
Mm.
That's not faithfulness. It's not.
But
an
aren't
issue
you
of
kind of
faithfulness.
in saying that? Aren't you kind of creating then a hierarchy of faithfulness?
It's not a
You s-
question of hierarchy.
But it is in a sense
No.
hierarchy, isn't it?
No, no, no. If I'm in the bank and I collect money out of the bank,
No. Go back to the marriage
no,
scenario.
I'm telling you, no. If I go to the bank and I collect money out of the bank, and a guy comes in with a gun and demands that money from me, are we talking about hierarchy?
In a sense, yes.
No.
Yeah, you're valuing your life over your money. So you've
Well,
placed your life as a higher priority than your money.
yeah, but it's not a hierarchy in terms of what's the most important thing from the
Well, there's
standpoint of,
priorities,
well,
right?
okay. So what you're missing here is the point is this is something that's been imposed on you. So it's not a matter of hierarchy.
Mhm.
This has been imposed on you, and you're being forced to make a decision you should not be making.
Mhm.
So this isn't just this hierarchy, hey, well, this new element has come into my life, and so, oh, well, I'm just going to have to bow down to it.
Mm.
No, you have options at that point, don't you? You have options. Am I going to let this guy just take my money? Just because he has a gun, am I obligated to give him my money? Do I have to do this? Can I defend myself? Is there another option? See, it's not, oh, well, I just have to do this because somebody's imposed something on me. And that's my point, is that because the question is changing. We're not talking about an intimate relationship between a husband and wife. We're talking about a relationship between a demanding spouse.
I see. Yeah.
And so we're not talking about hierarchy anymore. It isn't a question of hierarchy. It's a question of your spouse has decided to be unreasonable with you because they don't want you to do something that you enjoy doing. So is faithfulness ceasing to do what you enjoy doing because somebody stuck a gun to your head and told you to stop doing it?
But is it about enjoyment, or what you feel? This is what I mean by hierarchies.
Well, we're
because
talking about
you're-
faithfulness.
yeah, I understand. But you're choosing, in a sense, your priority in faithfulness at that moment. So
No,
if your
you're
spouse
not.
is like, I don't want you to go to
No,
work
you're
this
not.
morning,
No,
or
you're
church
not.
this morning,
No,
has
you're-
nothing to do with your enjoyment. It has to do with the commitment
You're
to God.
not
doesn't
making
it?
a choice based on faithfulness. It has nothing to do with faithfulness whatsoever. It has to do with something that's being imposed on you. It's not a question of faithfulness is not something that somebody can demand from you. You can't demand people to be faithful. You will be faithful to me. If they comply, are they being faithful? They're not being faithful. You can't use the word faithful.
I see what you're saying. Okay, you're gonna have to expound on that, because that was hard to grasp.
If your
for me.
boss,
Maybe I'm just stupid.
If your
I'm
boss
sorry,
tells you you have to be in at 8 o'clock, you have to be here at 8 a.m. in the morning. You have to be here.
Yeah.
And then
I see what you're saying.
It's 7:45.
Okay.
And he's looking out in the parking lot. It's 7:59, and he sees that you're not in the parking lot. So he goes home and he gets you and he says, "I said you have to be here at 8 o'clock," and then drags you to work at 8 o'clock. Are you being faithful?
No.
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 No,
Yeah.
because that's
You're
not a
being
matter.
forced. Yeah.
That's not a matter of
Yeah, yeah,
faithfulness.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that.
I
That's
see what
no
you're
longer.
saying. Yeah,
It's
okay.
no longer just a
Forgive
choice
me,
of
guys. Maybe I
faithful-
was just not getting that fast enough.
Yeah.
That was actually genuine.
Yeah, that's not a choice of faithfulness. See, faithfulness is something you have the option to do.
Yeah.
When somebody's forcing you to do something, it's no longer an issue of
Yeah.
deciding to be faithful.
Right.
God, like I said, God presents these things to us. He
Right.
presents to us, this is where you are. This is where I want you to be. These are the things I require. And now you decide, am I going to be faithful to that? You know, it's yes, you could go into the issues of heaven and hell and eternity and eternal rewards and stuff like that. But when you're talking about the issue of faithfulness, it can only be faithfulness if you choose to do it.
Yeah.
And it's got to be on the basis that you choose to do it because of some some not just voluntary, but trying to think of the word to use to describe it. Like in the case of God, it's the right thing to do. Okay, God's giving us the opportunity to do the right thing. But when somebody is giving you the opportunity to do the wrong thing or else, now we're not talking about faithfulness
Right.
anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I got you. Okay. So maybe I don't know if that actually, Karina's, I had a follow up question here. I'm understanding that according to the unbelieving spouse, church activities once a week will have to be enough to honor them. In order to honor God, I'm not able to make sense of this.
Right? So those are those are artificially imposed obligations. They're not.
Say that in like super
Yeah.
plain.
Well, the idea is when one human being tells another human being they can only do certain things so many times a week, you're no longer treating them like a human being. You're treating them like a dog or a puppy or it's that kind of thing. To demand, especially in a marriage, to demand that somebody can only do something every so often simply because you don't like it.
Mm.
That's not you obeying that doesn't make you faithful.
Right.
There's no an element of faithfulness in that. It's not an issue of faithfulness. It's just compliance.
Mhm.
That's all it is. It's just
So
compliance.
do you think that that's the difference between a lot of I'm trying to find the right category of people, but unbelieving is really the only way I can say it. But do you think the difference between what a lot of the perspective of unbelieving people think of what they think of faithfulness versus what God defines
in
as
a
faithfulness?
sense, yeah. See, but this is I think probably is a lot of the reason why, or some of the reason anyway, why some people don't want to become Christians is because they see other Christians that are compliant.
Compliant, yeah.
And they don't see it as faithfulness. They just see it as a bunch of puppy dogs that are just doing what they're told.
So what
They
is
don't see it
faithfulness
as
from the faithful
you know,
person's perspective?
well, to finish up the thought of what I was saying is that so if I understand Christianity correctly, you can't drink,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
because drinking is a sin,
Right.
and some Christians will say, yeah, that's true.
Yes.
Well, that's not faithfulness to not drink. That's
Yeah.
compliance.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the proper answer is no, I choose not to. I know this is what God says, but I agree. I agree with the problems with alcohol. I agree with where it leads. I don't need alcohol. It's not important to me. I'm not doing this because I have no choice. I'm doing this because I choose to.
Mhm.
I choose. I agree with this. I
Mhm.
agree with this standard. This is not something that is forced on me. So no. So the answer is no. I don't have to not drink. I choose to not drink.
Yeah.
And that's very different. That's very, very different because I'm faithful to God. I choose to not drink, not because God says don't drink, but because the Bible tells us, that drinking, the problems with drinking.
Yeah.
And I agree with that.
Uh,
So that's the issue. And there's a lot of, okay, so if you're a Christian, you can't do this, you have to do that, can't have to. It's just compliance,
Mhm.
And a lot of the compliance is, for the unbeliever is just slavery. You're just doing what you're told. You're not doing this because you want to do this. You're doing this because you don't have any choice.
Yeah.
There's just no option. But that's not faithfulness.
Mhm.
If you're just doing what you have no choice in the matter to do, then it can't be called faithfulness.
Yeah.
So being faithful to your spouse is not, I can't have sex outside of marriage, because I'm faithful to my spouse, so I can't have sex outside of marriage. Yeah, but if that's really what you want to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
then you're not faithful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So what is the you know I was going to say lesson to the unbeliever, but
Well, getting
okay,
getting back to
no,
the
no.
general idea of faithfulness, why be faithful to
Yeah.
anything, is that in faithfulness, your it's what you become, is really what faithfulness is. It's what you become by being faithful, and you become trustworthy, you become reliable. Especially you look at a husband and wife where the husband and wife have been faithful to each other. um, they trust each other. There's a camaraderie. They're not worried. Oh, I'm going to be going out of town. Where are you going? How long are you going to be gone? What's the, why are you doing this? How come I can't go with you?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff isn't happening because you've established something in the level of faithfulness, that there's a trust that's established, and that goes right across. Again, sort of the other side of the coin of, I can give somebody the keys to my house and I know they're not going to rip me off,
Mhm.
And so without faithfulness, you can't have trust, and that really is the issue, and so the issue of faithfulness is very critical to who you are as a person. It's not just, dogged compliance. That's not faithfulness.
So from an outsider's perspective, I mean, you're talking about, you mentioned how a lot of, this one of the reasons why a lot of people don't want to become Christians is because they know people who are just simply compliant.
Yeah.
How does God feel about compliance over, scripturally speaking? Can you give me like examples of how God speaks or views compliance versus faithfulness?
Uh, well, the first thought that comes to my mind is that when the Bible talks about the man who only has one talent, he's given this is a sum of money that's been entrusted to him, and he's been given this money. And the one man is given. There's three people in the two different versions of the parable. There are three people that are given a sum of money to come back, and they've been faithful with the money. They have invested the money and they have brought a return, and there's this you know sort of celebration between the two of them. Well done, good and faithful servant. There's a promotion that's giving, and this is a really wonderful time. The one who's been given the trust and who has been faithful to that trust is happy and is excited to report back the benefits of that faithfulness. And then that faithfulness brings further faithfulness. And so, two of those cases, that becomes apparent. But then the third one is just compliant. He says, "You've given me this money, and I know you told me to do business until I come, but I was afraid of losing it. I was afraid of what might happen. I know you're a hard man, all this kind of conversation that goes on. Here is your money back." So you could call him faithful, but he wasn't faithful because he was supposed to bring a return. He was supposed to invest that with the possibility of return. And the master even says, you could have, if at the very least, you could have just deposited this with the bankers and you would have gained a safe interest.
Mhm.
So you were not being faithful, even though you were being compliant. You didn't lose it. You were careful with it. You were compliant, but you weren't faithful. It's not the same thing because there was nothing that came from that. That was the wishes.
But wasn't he told to do something with it?
Yeah.
So technically, I mean, in the master's eyes, he wasn't compliant. In the unfaithful servant's eyes, he might have been.
Yeah. When I say compliant, all I mean is he did the bare minimum. He said, "Here, take what's yours," and so he didn't lose it. Okay. He was entrusted with something, he gave it back.
Mhm.
Okay. But the issue was that he was told, and yes, there's a matter of compliance in there, but what you have to see is the idea is that there was no trust between them. There was no trust. He was entrusted with this with the idea of bringing back a return,
Mhm.
which he didn't. He didn't bring back a return, but he didn't lose the money.
Mhm.
He still had it, and he gave it back. He didn't just squander it. He didn't lose it. He didn't do something with it. He wasn't unfaithful with the possession that he was given, but at the same time, he wasn't. He wasn't faithful. You don't look at him and say he's faithful. He was just, like I said, when I say compliant, I mean he just simply did the bare minimum to keep from getting in trouble,
Mhm.
you know, and he was able to give him back what he had.
Yeah.
And in his mind, it's like, hey, listen, I watched out for this. I was careful. I didn't lose it. Blah blah blah. See, I was compliant. And again, you can argue from the standpoint of the desires of the master means that he wasn't compliant,
Right.
but the behavior
Yeah.
itself was just a behavior
Yeah.
of compliance. I'm just going to do what I can get away with. He
Right.
didn't. He, like I said,
I see
if
what
he
you're
was
saying.
if he
Yeah.
was If he
Yeah.
did not want to be compliant, then he would have spent it,
Yeah.
you know. And
Yeah.
so, but in his mind,
Yeah.
I don't want to do this. I'm not going to spend it. So
Right.
that's when I say compliant. That's
Right.
what I'm talking about. He's only trying to appease the master. He's not being faithful to the master. He's
Mhm.
just trying to appease the master.
Mhm.
And that's a very different way of thinking.
Mhm.
So that's why that's different.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. We got another question here. Is it faithful when you do what you know is right to do, but you don't want to do it, but you do it because you know it's the right thing to do?
Um, I would go as far as to say that that's probably a good majority of faithfulness.
Mm.
Is that, there might be a reluctance to not do it, but you do it anyway.
Mhm.
So I would say that probably a better way of describing it is that the desire to do something is not a necessary component to faithfulness. It doesn't
I
have
mean,
to be there.
faithfulness is faithfulness to somebody
Yeah.
or something
Yeah, it's
else,
being
right?
responsible, and you don't
But to
always.
something or
Yeah,
someone
and you
else,
don't
right?
always feel like being
Yeah.
responsible.
Yeah.
But to be faithful, you always have to be responsible,
Mhm.
but you don't have to feel responsible. Jesus tells the parable of the two. He says, one son was told to go and
I was
work.
just thinking about that.
And he says, I'll go, but he doesn't go.
Yeah.
And then the other son says, I'm not going. I'm not even interested in going. But then he goes. And then Jesus asks the question, which one did the will of his father? In other words, which one was faithful?
Mhm.
The one that was faithful was the one that went,
Mhm.
because it isn't about how you feel about a thing. It's did you actually do it? So yes, it's not a necessary component. Faithfulness, you don't have to feel like being faithful. You
Mhm.
don't have to feel, oh, I really want to do this because I'm faithful.
Mhm.
That's not a requirement.
Mhm. So what makes somebody, I mean, you mentioned this a little bit about yourself, what was it that kind of changed? And because I know your testimony, I can ask it this way, and you've mentioned this before in our podcast, but the idea of faithfulness before you became a Christian kind of wasn't really even on your radar. You
No.
sleep around, you
Yeah,
do whatever you
no,
wanted,
not
whoever
at
you
all.
wanted,
Yeah.
and so what made the change? Like, was it so?
Well,
So
I
now that you're
described
just
that.
talking about like the compliance issue. Like, you didn't just get saved and then just start doing what Christians do.
I
Like
did
we,
do. Yeah, I did.
but there was a difference in motivation, because the people who, we mentioned the scripture a couple weeks ago about all who say Lord, Lord, not all who say Lord,
Yeah.
Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. They
But
did
those
things
who
that
do the
Christians
will.
do.
Well, yeah.
So there was an issue of
You got to be
compliance there.
careful. Yeah, you got to be careful when you're vocalizing that idea of doing what you're supposed to do, because
Well,
you're
I'm
not
trying to
talking
find the
about.
balance
Yeah,
between that. Where is
yeah.
the
You're
line?
not. So you're not talking about. You're not talking about those particular people. You're not talking about them doing what they're supposed to do. They're doing what they think is right.
Okay.
It's not the same thing at all. That's very, very different. And so doing what you think is right and doing what you're supposed to do are two totally different things, completely. And so that's why you have to be careful with that, because when it says, not all who say, Lord, Lord, to me will enter the kingdom of God, then they say, didn't we cast out demons in your name? Didn't we heal the sick? Didn't we do many miracles in your name? These were things that they thought.
Yeah.
They were the ones who decided that these were that was their definition of faithfulness, not God's definition of faithfulness.
Uh-huh.
And so that's different.
Yeah.
So, but what I'm talking about is when Jesus came into my life, the reason why I started doing the things that I did was because I understood that that was God's definition of faithfulness, not my definition of faithfulness. And it wasn't I wasn't cherry picking anything. It was, I'm doing this because this is what God has shown me. And it didn't matter whether or not I was in agreement with it. It wasn't an issue of agreement with anything. It was an issue of that these are the right things to do.
Mhm.
And so that's different. That's not the same thing. But God revealed that to me. I knew I knew what it meant to be a Christian after I became a Christian.
Mhm.
I knew, it's a package deal.
Mhm.
It's like you don't have to study it.
Mhm.
Improving on it and understanding the power of God to work through those things is a whole nother story, because I set out in the beginning to do it in my own power.
Right.
And that was where my problem was. I failed trying to do it in my own power. But my motivation was to be faithful to what God had shown me. I didn't understand about the Holy Spirit. I didn't understand about this dynamics of a spiritual life. I didn't understand any of those things. So I just tried to go out in my own steam, cold turkey. I'm going to quit all sin, and not understanding temptation, not understanding that when I go to a party where people are drinking, that willpower alone is not going to cut it. That I'm not going to just be able to say, nope, never going to drink again. That there's temptation and that there's being in the wrong place. And so some of the dynamics of being able to fulfill those those uh obligations was that changed. I didn't I had fully intended on fulfilling the obligations. The problem was is that I didn't know how. And so that's the distinction.
Mhm.
And so, like I said, I didn't need a manual or anything like that. I knew what I needed was I needed God to show me how to do what I knew He wanted me to do. That was the problem. I didn't know how. I didn't know how to do it. So it wasn't a question of motivation
Mhm.
or anything like that. The issue of being faithful was like I'm trying. I'm trying to do this, but I can't. I don't know how to get over the hump of some of these things.
Mhm. So you didn't just feel like this like overwhelming love for Jesus, like
No,
somebody would when they
no,
first met their
absolutely,
wife or
no,
something like that. You
no,
just
no,
flat out
no.
understood that this
Yeah.
was what God expected of you.
Yeah, and it wasn't that there was nothing there. There was a when you understand that God's real, there's a sense of privilege, you know, especially, and I don't think people can truly understand this who are raised in church. Um, is when you live 21 years of your life like I did, not knowing whether God's real or not. I mean, genuinely not knowing. Not I knew but was pretending he wasn't so I could live in sin or something like that. There was no game here. I didn't know. I didn't know if I died. I it I shared the story before at 5 years old. I mean, this very young age. I'm only recalling it from that way. I remember being in bed and having the sensation of being dead and the idea of being in the ground in dirt, you know, while my friends are all out playing, and of course because you can't imagine yourself dead because you're still thinking. But I saw myself as being absent of any of those things that my friends were doing, playing and doing things and having fun, and thinking this is a horrible thing. This is really, really a horrible thing. One day this is going to be a reality for me. I'm going to be in the ground and my friends are going to be having a great time and I'm going to just be gone. I'm just going to plain be gone. And that really messed with my head,
Yeah.
in a big way. And I did not have a foundation of God's existence or anything like that. And I ran out into the room and I'm crying and my parents are like, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" And mostly my mom. And then I explained my thinking. It wasn't a dream, my thinking. And I said, this isn't, why? Why do people have to die? And all my mom could tell me was, "Oh, honey, that's just the way it is. There's no answer to that. This is just the way things are." Zero hope. Zero hope. Not even, well, maybe there's a God, maybe religion is true, and maybe anything. It was like, it's the way it is. There is no God. That's why I say we were true atheists, because my parents didn't challenge it. They weren't mad at it. They weren't upset about the idea. Just simply God didn't exist. And that's all there was to it. And so when you come from that background, and then all of a sudden in a moment of time, you pray a prayer of experimentation. God, if you're real, I want to know you. I want to have a relationship with you.
Mm.
And then now you know for a fact that God's real. I mean, just a 100% fact, God's real. It's hard to explain. It's hard to express this sense of privilege, of just, I didn't know this and now I do. But I know something that my parents don't know. I mean, at least, at the minimum level, I know my parents don't know this because they should have been able to explain that to me, when I was a little kid. Well, there's a God and there's an eternity, but they couldn't. But I knew all this. I mean, it was all very clear. So there was this sense of privilege, of understanding this. There was the sense of obligation because now I understood what was required of me as well. Okay, now that you know that I'm God, here are the rules. And so it's like, okay, well, now I get this, but now I have right this second now to fully, you know, change my life to be able to, I'll use the word comply, to comply with all of these things, but not just comply, but to want to do it,
Mhm.
to have that,
Yeah.
you know,
You weren't being forced to do
I
it.
want to
That's the
do it. I'm
point.
not
Yeah.
being forced to do
Yeah.
it. I want to do it.
Yeah.
So all of that, all working together. And that's why I said that sense of privilege. And then the other thing is I started reading the Bible and then started learning things in the Bible. And again, I began to discover there are even people who claim to be Christians that don't even know this stuff. They don't understand what I understand. And realizing there's this sense of responsibility that's growing, I mean, very quickly, this sense of responsibility that's growing in me. But I want to be faithful. I want this. I've already said yes, I've
Mhm.
totally surrendered and I want this. And uh, so that's, you know, religious people who are raised in church, it's hard to grasp that. It's hard to grasp that sense because they've known this all their lives.
Mhm.
So even that moment of revelation where, yes, I know God's real, it doesn't quite equate out to, wow, I didn't know God was real and now I know God's real. It equates out to, wow, this is real after all,
Mm.
you know. And so it doesn't carry that same kind of a thing.
Mm. So you're kind of identifying another group of people we haven't talked as much about, but the people who, uh, you know, so you came to a point where you actually made a decision, like you made a decision to be faithful. But then you have other people like the servant you mentioned who are given an opportunity like that
Uh-huh.
and then say no. Why? Why do
Yeah.
people say no to that? And why do people miss
Well,
out on now? You're talking about the growing
yeah, to me, that's
sense
the
of
biggest
privilege and
mystery. That's the biggest mystery of all of life is I don't understand, because I see people that they choose a path of rejection of what stuff that's clearly stated in God's word. Um, and then they work overtime to deceive themselves and convince themselves that no, in fact, I have done the right thing and I've done what God wants me to
is
do.
that all really self-inflicted, or I mean, I'm just trying to be empathetic here, like, or play the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Is it possible that there's like a genuine level of confusion? Is it like, is there a battle in the mind going on that's like, maybe this is true, maybe it's not, or are they really
At the end of the
rejecting the
day,
truth?
it is deception. It is purely deception. Okay. Um, I'm talking about from the standpoint of having had that moment of clarity,
Mm.
and then what happens after that. And so because not every religious people don't necessarily have that moment of clarity because they were raised in it. They had this belief system or whatever, but they never had that. What I'm referring to is that moment of clarity, what salvation is, heaven and hell, obligation, personal responsibility. Haven't had that. That hasn't happened to them.
Mm.
And so they're just doing stuff because they're living what I've been describing lately as they're just living a theology. It's not salvation, it's just a theology. They're trying to comply with this theology as best they know how, but it's still theology. It may or may not be true at the end of the day. It may or may not be true. There's not this sense of, well, if I don't do this, then I may not make it to heaven or anything like that. This is just theology, and it's just the fulfillment of theology. But at the end of the day, for those who have had that moment of clarity and they are no longer it's those who have like what the Bible talks about. It says that those who have tasted of the good things of God, and so those that have actually crossed over, they have tasted, yes, this is, but then they decide they're going to go back. They decide they're going to be selfish or any of those kinds of things. When they make those kinds of decisions, it really is a mystery to me, and it is something I'm trying to learn and to understand as people do this because I see it over the years. I mean, I've you know, even just recently, I had somebody, a few months back to me say, I see what happens to people that don't do what you say, and I see what happens to people that do what you say. And then they choose not to do what I say and then say, see, this is the problem is you expect everybody to do what you say. And it's like, so which person do I think about when I think about you now? Do I think about you as the person who said, I see their conclusion, not mine.
Mm.
I see, what you say and what happens to people that do what you say, and I see what happens to people that don't do what you say. And so the idea of I see the benefits of people who follow your teaching, and then I see the disadvantages or even the destruction of what happens to people that don't follow your teaching, and then later on say I'm not going to follow your teaching, and I can, it's obvious to me that you're upset because I'm not following your teaching because you're a selfish person and you just think everybody should do what you say. And it's like, How did they get from there to there? That's a deception. They had to disconnect wires in their brain and then cross them and reconnect them to
Yeah.
other places because they didn't always think that way. They were thinking one way and had some measure of clarity in their thinking, but now they've taken and unplugged some of those wires that were benefiting them. They were starting to improve. They were starting to benefit. Well, they've unplugged those wires and then they've replugged them in weird places in their thinking. It's self-deception.
Mhm.
They want that.
Self-imposed.
Yeah, it's self-imposed. They've plugged it in there. Now, I won't, I mean, don't. There is a demonic element that the devil said, take that wire and plug it in over here because it'll work better
Yeah.
like that. But at the end of the day, they're the ones who said, I'm going to plug this in over here
Mm.
and I'm going to do this. And then all of a sudden they start thinking weird, but when you plug that wire in, you're done. You're committed now. Because you're going to plug a wire into a wrong place. And so you pick that up and you go and you say, I'm plugging this wire in here. I know it's not the right thing to do, but I'm plugging it in here anyway. And now all of a sudden the current begins to flow. And now that's who they are, And so what they were before is that's gone now. That doesn't even exist. And in their mind, that person never existed. And so this is the thing. This is why faithfulness is so critical, is because when you choose you don't want to be faithful and you start plugging wires into the wrong place, it's who you become,
Mm.
And this is why faithfulness is so important.
And how does faithfulness avoid that?
Because you have this wire in your hand, you're going to plug it into the wrong place, but you say, I don't want to do that, because this is wrong,
Mhm.
and I don't want to do this. I'm going to be faithful to the truth,
Mhm.
And so I'm not going to plug this in there. And so you put it back where it was, or you leave it tangling, because it
Mhm.
wasn't plugged in anywhere, whatever the case may be. But that's true. That's true faithfulness. And see, but when you decide you're going to be, that's why Jesus, when he said he is faithful in that which is least, is faithful over much, but he was not faithful in that which is least. Is not faithful over much. And so that idea, that if you even in this small area, like something like what I just described about, I if I listen to you, good things happen. If I don't listen to you, bad things happen. But then you have this choice to not listen. I'm not going to listen to you. When you've already made the connections. You've made those connections. If I listen to this, I'm going the right direction. If I don't listen to this, I'm going the wrong direction. You've plugged those things in and it's been working. It's literally been working. And then you say, unplug, and I'm going to plug this into the wrong socket. You're now being unfaithful to what you had believed before. You're unplugging that and you're plugging that in. And so now you are unfaithful. But now you have started a whole new way of thinking in your brain. And so now you're going to justify unfaithfulness.
Mm.
You're going to legitimize unfaithfulness, and you're going to make unfaithfulness look like faithfulness. And so it's self-deception. It's not so much that I can't believe this anymore. I can't believe this anymore. I can't believe this. I've got to will myself out of this. No, it's just simply a decision to just take that wire and plug it into the wrong place.
Mm.
And once you do that, then everything just starts to go from there. And that's why, that statement, when and you can use this at a broader level, when you plug in to something and you're going down a path that's helping you, and then that if you unplug that and plug it in somewhere else, that bad things are going to happen. And so now you're faced with the decision to plug that from here over to here.
Mhm.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Is it that's the issue.
Yeah.
So now when you plug that in, bad things are going to happen to you, but you don't believe it anymore.
Mhm.
Because that's what happened to the other people. The other people went, and all of a sudden bad things start happening.
Mhm.
But in their minds, they don't think that. They don't think bad things are going to happen. That's why they made that decision. They think, no, this is going to lead me to better things. But you saying, no, I've got this plugged into here. I see from the outside what that's like. But when you take that out and you plug it in and you decide you're going to take this wrong path and you plug that in, you no longer believe it's the wrong path. And so that's why the same thing happens. That's why you have the same thing happen to the same kinds of people. It's like lemmings falling off the edge of a cliff. Is that it's just that they fall off, and then you think, oh, I'm not getting in that line. And then you decide, you know what, screw this. I am going to get in that line. But you know what? I'm not going to jump off the cliff when I get to the edge.
Yeah.
But when you get in line, you get to the edge of the cliff and you just jump off.
Yeah.
You don't think about not jumping off anymore. It's not an option anymore to not jump. You just jump. Just the way it works. And so this is why faithfulness is so critical, because faithfulness is going to determine the decisions that you make in the future.
So is faithfulness really as simple as just choosing right over wrong?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so we've established that God's the one that determines what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why
Yeah.
faithfulness only works in context
Yeah.
of God.
Yeah.
You
So
know?
when you're not a believer in God, there is no right and wrong.
It's not that there is no right and wrong. It's just that it's not as clearly defined.
Mhm.
Because you think you know what right and wrong are, and you may be right and you may be wrong in what you think.
Mhm.
I believe this is right. Could be. There's a 50-50 chance. I mean, even maybe a 90-10 chance that it's right. But you don't know for a fact, because you haven't submitted your life in true faithfulness to God.
Mhm.
So, you can't. Faithfulness is not doing the things that God wants us to do. Faithfulness is understanding who God is, and living accordingly.
Mhm.
So it's a much bigger picture, because it's not just these. That's why, like what I said earlier, you can't be faithful in one thing and then not be faithful in another thing. Faithfulness is faithfulness.
Yeah. So is God going to hold believers and unbelievers accountable for that same?
Well, there's the processes, which is true of everybody. There's the processes of sowing and reaping.
Yeah.
You're going to reap what you've sown, and so whatever decisions you've made, good or bad, they're gonna bear the fruit accordingly with the decisions that you've made. But then there's ultimately going to be an eternal consequences for disobedience, or being unfaithful.
Yeah. Very good. Well, that was actually pretty good. I'm glad we went that direction. Very cool. Well, we're glad you guys joined us tonight. We're pretty out of time tonight. So great questions, and invite people to these podcasts. Let people know about them. We're here to help. We want to remind you as well about our services. Wednesday night at 7:00, we meet here an hour early for prayer, so the doors will be open early. You can come early, and then we will also be having a special guest speaker who is getting here when did he arrive here? How long has he been here so far?
A couple of weeks that
Okay.
he's come from China, but
Yeah.
was ministering in China for was it 6 years, I think?
Yeah.
And and so with
The
all
church is
the
still there.
with all
Going.
the crazy stuff that was going on in China, it's really exciting that he's come back, because there's lots of drama going on in China right now that I think most Americans aren't even familiar with, but they're not favorable towards foreigners anymore, and that was part of the reason why he had to come home, was because of that animosity towards foreigners. But the good news is that the church there is continuing on, which is another testimony to the fact that there is a God, because so here's this American that's gone over there and taught them about the things of God and has left, and they want to continue this on
Yeah.
by themselves.
Yeah.
So it's obviously not just something that was just driven by an American coming over and indoctrinating,
Yeah.
because they're continuing this on their own.
Mm.
So it's really powerful.
Yeah. So that'll be a real treat. That'll be
Yeah.
tomorrow night and also Sunday morning and Sunday night,
Yes.
full service. So all right. Well, we got an awesome treat for everybody. So those are things to look forward to, and we will see everybody soon. Next week we'll be here again, and you guys let us know in the comment section, any thoughts or questions you guys have. Especially if you're watching this after the fact, after the live podcast, you guys are welcome to throw those in there as well. So we'll see you guys soon.